Ever wonder which films caused actual riots in theaters? The 1960s wasn't just about peace and love. Studios risked everything on shocking content that got directors arrested, theaters raided, and prints literally burned by authorities. Which controversial masterpiece nearly bankrupted its studio? Which one had the Vatican issuing official condemnations? Stick around for the film that had audiences literally fainting in the aisles. Number 15. Petulia, 1968. Petulia isn't just another 60s drama. This mind-bending psychological roller coaster, starring Julie Christie and George C. Scott, was so ahead of its time that Warner Brothers had absolutely no idea how to market it. Director Richard Lester threw conventional storytelling right out the window, using jarring flash-forwards, disorienting jump cuts, and a narrative that deliberately refuses to hold your hand. Behind the scenes, the studio completely panicked. Test audiences were utterly baffled by what they were watching. Warner Brothers ended up shelving the film for an entire year, while they desperately tried to figure out what to do with it. When they finally dumped it into theaters with barely any promotion, it bombed spectacularly. Critics were completely split. Pauline Kael declared it one of the best American films of the decade, while mainstream reviewers dismissed it as pretentious nonsense. The film barely made back half its $2.5 million budget, effectively killing Lester's Hollywood career momentum. What's wild is how influential Petulia eventually became. Martin Scorsese later cited it as a major inspiration, pointing to its fragmented editing style as revolutionary. Today, film scholars consider it the missing link between classic Hollywood and the more experimental new wave that followed. Every modern movie with non-linear storytelling owes something to this commercial disaster that dared to treat its audience like adults. Number 14. The Loved One, 1965. MGM literally advertised The Loved One as the motion picture with something to offend everyone. And they weren't kidding. This pitch-black satire on America's funeral industry features cremation cannons, corpses shot into space, and an undertaker named Mr. Joyboy, who still lives with his taxidermy-obsessed mother. Not exactly your typical mid-60s comedy. Fresh off his Oscar win for Tom Jones, director Tony Richardson delivered something so bizarre that studio execs physically recoiled when they saw the final cut. They expected a mainstream prestige hit. What they got was a film where a character keeps her pet falcon fed by having it eat dead bodies in a cemetery. The Catholic Legion of Decency slapped it with a condemned rating, effectively telling millions of Catholics they'd be sinning just by buying a ticket. Critics were equally horrified, with many calling it grotesque and mean-spirited. The movie crashed and burned at the box office, making less than a quarter of its $4 million budget. Jonathan Winters, who played dual roles in the film, later admitted he took the part because it was the most deranged script I'd ever read. John Waters, king of transgressive cinema, named it one of his all-time favorites precisely because it managed to be both high art and completely tasteless simultaneously. The Loved One remains the weirdest Hollywood film ever made about death, and that's saying something. Number 13. The Swimmer, 1968. The Swimmer is possibly the strangest film on Burt Lancaster's resume. This surreal suburban nightmare follows a man who decides to swim home by traveling through every backyard pool in his wealthy Connecticut neighborhood. What starts as a quirky premise gradually transforms into a devastating portrait of a man whose entire life has collapsed without him even realizing it. Making it was absolute chaos. Director Frank Perry was fired halfway through production after clashing with Lancaster. Sidney Pollack was quietly brought in to reshoot crucial scenes, including a completely different ending. Lancaster fought constantly with both directors, especially during reshoots months later, when he looked visibly older and had to wear an unconvincing wig. The budget was around $1 million, but it completely tanked at theaters, barely making $200,000. Columbia Pictures pulled it from circulation almost immediately, and it disappeared into obscurity. Critics were baffled by its dreamlike quality and crushing finale. Roger Ebert later re-evaluated it as a film of uncommon strength, praising how it used swimming pools as symbols of wealth and emptiness. Today, The Swimmer is considered a lost masterpiece of American cinema that perfectly captured the hollowness beneath the manicured lawns of suburban prosperity. Lancaster himself later called it the best film I ever made, despite the production being what he described as 17 weeks of absolute misery. Number 12. Seconds, 1966. Seconds is the film that made Rock Hudson's fans run screaming from theaters. This paranoid nightmare follows a middle-aged banker who pays a mysterious organization to fake his death, give him a new face through plastic surgery, and restart his life as a handsome artist in California. Spoiler alert, it doesn't end well for anyone involved. Director John Frankenheimer employed fisheye lenses, disorienting angles, and a relentless mood of creeping dread. The infamous rebirth sequence was so disturbing that preview audiences literally walked out. Paramount executives were horrified by what they saw as a commercial disaster in the making. They were right. The film bombed catastrophically at the Cannes Film Festival, and then died a quick death at the American box office. Critics dismissed it as pretentious and needlessly grim. Rock Hudson, desperate to break out of romantic comedies, saw his dramatic ambitions crushed overnight. Cinematographer James Wong Howe created some of the most nightmarish black and white imagery ever put on film, and the movie's exploration of identity, aging, and societal conformity was decades ahead of its time. Today, Seconds is considered one of the most chilling American films ever made, with directors from David Fincher to Christopher Nolan citing it as a major influence. As Hudson's final serious dramatic role, it stands as proof of the acting talent that romantic comedies never fully allowed him to display. Number 11. The Night of the Generals, 1967. The Night of the Generals throws you into a story most studios wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. This bizarre thriller is set during World War II, but centers on Nazi generals being investigated for murdering women in occupied territories. Peter O'Toole plays an ice-cold SS officer with disturbing tendencies. Omar Sharif is the investigator digging for truth, and Donald Pleasance lurks in every shadow. Behind the camera, things were just as chaotic as on screen. Producer Sam Spiegel wanted another Lawrence of Arabia blockbuster, banking entirely on O'Toole's star power, but production was a nightmare. Constant rewrites, reshoots across multiple countries just to meet co-production agreements, and a budget that spiraled completely out of control. The plot jumps between occupied Warsaw and Paris, with a tone that never quite decides if it's a war film, murder mystery, or psychological study. When it finally hit theaters, audiences were utterly confused. It opened to tepid reviews and barely made half its massive budget back at the box office. O'Toole's performance as the disturbed General Tanz ranks among his most chilling work, yet both he and Sharif later distanced themselves from the film entirely. Martin Scorsese later praised its fragmented storytelling approach, and the film gradually developed a cult following among viewers fascinated by its moral ambiguity and refusal to simplify complex characters. Even today, The Night of the Generals remains one of the most unsettling examinations of evil ever put on screen. Number 10. Play Dirty, 1969. Play Dirty is war cinema at its most cynical and mean-spirited. Michael Caine stars in one of his grittiest roles, playing a former oil executive forced to lead a squad of criminals on a suicide mission across North Africa. Think The Dirty Dozen, but with zero heroism and not a single likable character in sight. Production was a disaster from day one. The original director either quit or got fired before filming even began. André de Toth stepped in, but had a completely different style, caring more about explosions than character development. Caine later admitted it was one of the worst filming experiences of his entire career. United Artists hoped for a Guns of Navarone-style hit, but got something far darker. The movie's nihilistic tone shocked audiences in 1969, with its portrayal of war as pointless and soldiers as amoral opportunists. It barely made a third of its budget back and vanished from theaters almost overnight. What's fascinating is how the film's reputation has completely reversed over time. Martin Scorsese later praised it for its unflinching brutality and refusal to glorify combat. The final scene, which I won't spoil here, remains one of the most cynical endings in war movie history. Play Dirty anticipated the moral ambiguity of 1970s cinema, arriving just a few years too early for audiences to appreciate its uncompromising vision of conflict without heroes. Number 9. The Happening, 1967. The Happening might be the strangest entry on Anthony Quinn's resume. This bizarre counterculture comedy follows a group of hippies who accidentally kidnap a mafia boss and then decide to demand ransom from his own organization. The tone veers wildly from slapstick to social commentary to crime drama, never quite settling on what kind of movie it wants to be. Director Elliot Silverstein had just come off the massive success of Cat Ballou, but this follow-up proved that lightning rarely strikes twice. The studio marketed it as a hip, youth-oriented romp, but audiences found it too dark for a comedy and too goofy for a crime film. The hippie characters came across as caricatures rather than authentic representations of counterculture. Critics savaged it, with Roger Ebert calling it a desperately unfunny attempt to cash in on contemporary themes. Despite having the hit title song The Happening by the Supremes, the movie disappeared quickly from theaters and became a notorious flop. The film's attempts to capitalize on late 60s youth culture now make it a fascinating time capsule of how mainstream Hollywood completely misunderstood the counterculture movement. Faye Dunaway, just before her career-making role in Bonnie and Clyde, appears in a supporting role she later refused to discuss in interviews. For a brief glimpse of how spectacularly the old Hollywood system failed to connect with the changing times, The Happening remains an unintentionally revealing disaster. Number 8. The Secret War of Harry Frig, 1968. This one might be the weirdest mismatch of star and material in Paul Newman's entire career. The Secret War of Harry Frig stars Newman as a military escape artist who gets parachuted behind enemy lines to rescue 5 captured generals. But these generals aren't exactly suffering. They're living comfortably in an Italian villa, more concerned with their golf games than escaping. Jack Smite directed after just finishing Harper with Newman and pushed hard to cast him again. Universal Studios paid Newman over $1 million, enormous money in 1968, thinking his star power alone would carry this strange mix of war drama and slapstick comedy. They were catastrophically wrong. The budget ballooned past $6 million, and critics absolutely demolished it. Roger Ebert delivered the killing blow. I've seen lousy movies before, but never one that seemed ashamed of itself. The film flopped spectacularly, making back barely half its budget. Newman himself seemed to agree with the critics. He completely distanced himself from the movie afterward and never mentioned it in interviews. What makes Harry Frig such a fascinating failure is watching Newman, one of the greatest actors of his generation, visibly struggling to find the right tone in a film that can't decide what it wants to be. The movie vanished so completely that even hardcore Newman fans often have no idea it exists. As a bizarre footnote in an otherwise stellar career, it demonstrates how even the biggest stars couldn't save fundamentally misguided concepts. Number 7. Major Dundee, 1965. Major Dundee is what happens when a studio goes to war with its own director. Sam Peckinpah wanted to make a sprawling Civil War epic that showed the brutal reality of frontier violence. What he got was a production nightmare that nearly ended his career. Charlton Heston stars as a disgraced Union officer leading a ragtag crew, including Confederate prisoners, into Mexico to hunt Apaches. Peckinpah envisioned a 3-hour revisionist epic. Columbia Pictures had other plans. Before shooting even began, They slashed his budget by $1.5 million. When filming finally wrapped, the studio chopped 40 critical minutes from his final cut without consultation. Peckinpah fought with everyone on set. He drank heavily, argued constantly with actors, and nearly got himself fired multiple times. Heston was so committed to finishing the film that he gave up his salary and even threatened Peckinpah with a saber when the director's behavior became too erratic. The version Columbia released was a confusing mess with jarring tone shifts and plot holes. Critics panned it as bloated and unfocused. The film cost approximately $4.5 million, but only earned around $3 million. Peckinpah himself called it the most painful experience of his career. What's remarkable is that even in its butchered form, glimpses of brilliance shine through. A restored version, released in 2005, reclaimed some of Peckinpah's vision, revealing the masterpiece that might have been. Today, Major Dundee is studied by film scholars as a fascinating case of studio interference, destroying a potentially great work, while simultaneously launching Peckinpah's reputation as a brilliant but difficult auteur. Number 6. 55 Days at Peking, 1963. 55 Days at Peking might be the most expensive history lesson nobody asked for. This massive epic depicts the Boxer Rebellion in China around 1900, with Charlton Heston as a tough-as-nails U.S. Marine leading an international force against thousands of Chinese fighters. The scale is absolutely staggering. They built an entire replica of Beijing in Spain just for this movie. Behind the scenes, it was total chaos. Charlton Heston and Ava Gardner despised each other. He thought she was unprofessional and drank too much. She found him stiff and boring. Their chemistry was non-existent. Even worse, director Nicholas Ray, of Rebel Without a Cause fame, had a complete mental breakdown halfway through production, fighting constantly with producer Samuel Bronston before being fired. Gardner eventually had enough and abandoned the production entirely. She walked off set and never returned, forcing them to finish her scenes with a body double. China banned the film outright for its portrayal of the Chinese as savage hordes. And even with Heston's star power, the film lost millions at the box office. The movie's colossal failure contributed to the end of the historical epic trend and financially ruined producer Samuel Bronston. His production company collapsed shortly after, ending his dream of creating a Hollywood in Madrid. Today, the film is primarily remembered as a cautionary tale of overambition and for its stunning battle sequences that required thousands of extras, a scale of filmmaking that's now extinct in the age of CGI. Number 5. The Fall of the Roman Empire, 1964. The Fall of the Roman Empire isn't just a movie title. It's what literally happened to producer Samuel Bronston's career. This colossal epic starring Sophia Loren, Stephen Boyd, and Alec Guinness was designed to be the grandest historical spectacle ever filmed. The Roman Forum set alone was the largest outdoor set in film history at that point, bigger than the actual Forum in Rome. The production numbers are mind-boggling. Over 6,000 extras, 1,200 horses, and a budget that exploded to $19 million. Bronston built an entire Roman city in Spain's countryside, with marble columns that were actually made of marble, not plywood or plaster. The chariot race sequence took 3 weeks to film and required special insurance for all participants. When it finally hit theaters, audiences had epic fatigue. After Ben-Hur, Spartacus, and Cleopatra, nobody wanted another 3-hour Roman drama, especially one with a downbeat ending where the empire actually falls. The film earned just $4.75 million in America against that massive budget, becoming one of the decade's most spectacular financial disasters. The fallout was immediate and severe. Bronston's production company collapsed, his Spanish studio was seized by creditors, and the era of the historical epic effectively died with it. Yet time has been surprisingly kind to the film itself. Martin Scorsese later championed it as a misunderstood masterpiece, praising its political themes and stunning visuals. The fall of the Roman Empire remains both a cautionary tale about Hollywood excess and, ironically, one of the last truly great epics before the genre itself fell. Number 4. The Chase, 1966. The Chase assembled possibly the most impressive talent of any 60s film. Marlon Brando, Jane Fonda, Robert Redford, directed by Arthur Penn, produced by Sam Spiegel, and written by Lillian Hellman. With that lineup, how could it possibly fail? Spectacularly, as it turns out. This Southern-set drama follows a sheriff trying to protect an escaped convict, Redford, from the town's bloodthirsty residents. What should have been a tense thriller instead became a behind-the-scenes battleground. Hellman's script was heavily rewritten without her knowledge. Producer Spiegel constantly undermined Penn's authority. Brando was so frustrated by the chaos that he later claimed he gave one of his worst performances. The film's violent climax shocked 1966 audiences, particularly a brutal beating scene that was unusually graphic for its time. Critics dismissed it as pretentious and heavy-handed. The New York Times called it as grotesque as it is implausible. Despite its star power, the film lost millions and damaged Penn's reputation until he redeemed himself the following year with Bonnie and Clyde. What's fascinating is how The Chase anticipated the more explicit violence and moral ambiguity that would define late 60s cinema. It arrived just a year too early to benefit from changing attitudes. Brando later said the film could have been something special if the studio had left Penn alone. Instead, it remains a frustrating, almost masterpiece that showed how even the biggest names in Hollywood couldn't overcome studio interference and creative conflict. Number 3. Cleopatra, 1963. Cleopatra isn't just a film that flopped. It's the movie that nearly destroyed 20th Century Fox entirely. Originally budgeted at $2 million, the final cost exploded to over $40 million, equivalent to about $350 million today, making it proportionally one of the most expensive films ever made. Elizabeth Taylor alone received an unprecedented $1 million salary, plus a percentage of the profits. The production disasters started immediately. The first director quit when Taylor fell seriously ill during filming in London, forcing a complete shutdown. Fox abandoned the nearly completed London sets and moved the entire production to Rome, where they rebuilt massive Egyptian palaces from scratch. Joseph L. Mankiewicz, who took over directing, shot so much footage that Fox considered releasing it as 2 separate films. And then there was the scandal. Taylor and co-star Richard Burton began a very public affair during filming, despite both being married to other people. The Vatican officially condemned their erotic vagrancy, and the worldwide tabloid frenzy overshadowed the actual movie. When it finally premiered at a bladder-testing 4 hours and 3 minutes, critics were mixed, and audiences couldn't sustain enough interest to recoup the massive investment. Despite being 1963's highest-grossing film with $57 million, Cleopatra still lost so much money that Fox had to sell off large portions of its studio backlot, now Century City in Los Angeles, just to survive. The studio only recovered when The Sound of Music became an unexpected smash in 1965. Today, Cleopatra stands as both a cautionary tale about Hollywood excess and a fascinating time capsule of a studio system in transition, willing to risk everything on a single spectacular gamble. Number 2. Blowup, 1966. Blowup isn't just controversial. It's the film that finally broke Hollywood's censorship system. This mind-bending thriller follows a fashion photographer in swinging London who believes he accidentally captured a murder in the background of a photo shoot. As he enlarges the images, he descends into an existential crisis about reality itself. Italian director Michelangelo Antonioni deliberately defied every rule in the production code handbook. The film featured the first full-frontal nudity in a mainstream Western release, explicit drug use, and an infamous threesome scene with the photographer and 2 teenage models. The Catholic Legion of Decency condemned it as morally objectionable, while censors demanded extensive cuts that Antonioni refused to make. MGM released the film without production code approval, effectively killing the decades-old censorship system. When theaters weren't shut down for showing it, they were picketed by religious groups. Despite the controversy, or more likely because of it, Blowup became a surprise box office hit, grossing over $20 million on a modest budget and earning Antonioni Oscar nominations for Best Director and Best Screenplay. The film's ambiguous ending infuriated literal-minded viewers, but thrilled critics. The New York Times called it a fascinating picture, which has something real to say about the matter of personal involvement and emotional commitment in a jazzed-up, media-hooked-in world. Francis Ford Coppola and Brian De Palma have cited it as a major influence on their work. Perhaps most significantly, Blowup's success directly led to the creation of the MPAA rating system in 1968, forever changing how films would be regulated. Without this controversial masterpiece, American cinema might have remained trapped in production code purgatory for years longer. Number 1. Psycho, 1960. Psycho isn't just Alfred Hitchcock's most controversial film. It completely rewrote the rules of cinema. Paramount Studios was so disturbed by Hitchcock's proposal that they refused to finance it, forcing him to use his TV crew and shoot in black and white to keep costs down. He even mortgaged his house to help fund the film himself. The infamous shower scene, with its 78 camera setups and 52 edits in just 45 seconds, shocked 1960 audiences unprepared for such explicit violence. Hitchcock used chocolate syrup for blood and the sound of stabbing melons to create the murder's audio effects. Censors demanded cuts, which Hitchcock pretended to make while actually leaving the footage intact. The marketing was revolutionary. Theaters were instructed not to admit anyone after the film started, previously unheard of when audiences typically wandered in at any point during continuous showings. Hitchcock bought up copies of Robert Bloch's novel to keep the twist ending secret and forced critics not to reveal plot details. Some theaters hired nurses to attend to fainting patrons, while others had smelling salts on hand. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, Psycho became Hitchcock's biggest hit, grossing $50 million on a budget of just $800,000. The Catholic Legion of Decency condemned it. Psychiatrists criticized its portrayal of mental illness, and numerous countries heavily censored or banned it outright. Beyond its commercial success, Psycho fundamentally changed cinema. It killed off its star in the first act, introduced slasher film conventions, and destroyed the production code's rigid control over content. Bernard Herrmann's screeching violin score became perhaps the most recognized piece of film music ever created. Without Psycho, modern horror simply wouldn't exist as we know it. So there you have it. 15 controversial films that pushed boundaries, shocked audiences, and sometimes destroyed careers. But here's the real question. Have modern movies lost their edge? Has CGI and market testing made it impossible to create truly boundary-pushing cinema anymore? Let us know in the comments which controversial 60s film you think couldn't be made today, or if you believe modern filmmakers have found new ways to challenge audiences. Subscribe for more deep dives into cinema's most provocative moments.